The silence in that dim chamber had a weight all its own, a cold promise that crawled along your spine before the first light even stirred outside. The air hung heavy, thick with the musk of damp stone and unwashed bodies, a scent so familiar that it felt almost part of your skin. Pale gray morning seeped through the narrow window, smudging the walls in chalky shadows. Outside, the village lay cloaked in a veil of mist, motions slow and pale as wet ashes. Your breath drew ragged, the rough wool of your only cloak rasping against your skin, threading discomfort through the chill. A faint rasp broke the hush, a blade being sharpened somewhere nearby, its repetitive grind echoing into the stillness like the beating of a slow, weary heart. If waiting for your phone to recharge is agony today, imagine the despair of watching your last ember die out in this medieval gloom. No gentle glow, only shadows that swallowed hopes whole. Your hands moved almost by habit, sweeping coarse straw from the cold, uneven floor, the brittle fragments crackling against the stone. The slow rhythm grounded you amidst the dull ache that clung to these days. Days filled with grinding grain, dull tasks, and whispers of melancholy from beyond the chamber walls. Voices carried faintly from the village, blurred murmurs of anguish and quiet despair. Stories told and retold without relief. Yet a fragile ember pulsed beneath the gray monotony. Around a scant fire pit, the few gathered, drew warmth not just from heat, but from shared presence. A brief flicker of light in a world so often shrouded in shadows. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, someone still cared. But then silence interrupted. The dogs stopped barking all at once, their sudden hush as sharp and unsettling as a held breath. Eyes met quietly across the room, unspoken messages weaving tension in the stale air. It was the sort of pause that felt like the world had shifted underfoot, like a shadow passing just out of reach. Whatever was coming, it was near. Hey, before Morpheus takes you away for good, make sure you're still subscribed. For some, the button's vanished, and I don't want you missing the next stories to sleep by. While you're at it, leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your little interaction keeps this quiet corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The dog's sudden silence still echoed in your ears, an absence more deafening than any bark. Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the village whole, smothering even the faintest hint of movement. The chill deepened, pressing into your bones like the world itself had decided to pause breathlessly, which, in a way, it had. Your fingers flexed, tracing the rough fibers of the cloak tighter against your frame. The staleness of the chamber seemed to close in, as if the damp stone walls inhaled the very warmth that once hovered here. You moved toward the narrow window, the faint light struggling against the fog, and for a moment, the outside world looked like a ghost's canvas blurred, pale and fragile. The blade sharpening had ceased. Now, all you could hear was your own breath, ragged and uneven, and a recurring thud further up the corridor. Steps. Your heart skipped, not from surprise, but from a slow, mounting dread, like watching a dark cloud inch closer on a dreary day. The noise approached, steady but careful, almost hesitant. Whoever was coming knew silence had become the loudest thing in the village. You stepped back from the window and crouched by the fire pit. The few others huddled there twisted their heads toward the sound, eyes narrowing under the weight of unvoiced fears. The fire's glow flickered weakly against the stone, as if fighting a losing battle with the damp gloom, a flicker of hope, fragile as a moth's wing. Outside, the village's usual chorus, chickens clucking, carts creaking, children's cries, had vanished as completely as the sun's warm rays. You could almost taste the absence, bitter and cold. Then came the faint click of a latch, deliberate, slow, a sound that carved its own space in the silence. Another step slipped through the doorway, this one softer, less cautious, but heavy with purpose. A figure emerged. You didn't have to look up to know who it was. The scent gave it away, earthy sweat mixed with the bitter dryness of fear, and beneath it all, something sharper, like iron. Not blood yet, but close. Your lungs tightened around the air, thick and reluctant. The fire's light caught a pale face, eyes darker than the space around them, a mouth set in a thin, exhausted line. He moved closer, and the murmurs around the pit quieted to ghosts. Whispers followed him, fractured tales of who had tried and failed to leave the village the day before, of doors bolted tight, of walls watched like prison bars. And yet here he was, returning like a shadow that refused to fade. You met his gaze briefly. There was no comfort there, only the slow bleed of news that your fragile sanctuary might shatter any moment. He spoke, voice low and raw, barely above the crackle of the fire. "They're coming." The words settled unevenly, their weight a stone dropped into the still water of your thoughts. Who exactly? What did they want? No one needed to ask aloud. The village had long whispered about raids, about disappearances after dusk, about the grim habit of neighbors vanishing without a trace. Your fingers twitched, restless against the cold floor. Outside, beyond these walls, lurked a fear far older than the damp stone or the bleak dawn. A fear that wore human faces. The fire flickered again, and amid the gloom, you noticed a dry twig fall into the flames. A small spark danced boldly before the wood hissed and swallowed it whole. Brief defiance before being consumed. Do they know? You whispered, more to yourself than anyone else. He shook his head. No, but they will soon. The chamber shuddered with a distant boom, like a fist against a heavy door, and the tension that had been simmering tasted suddenly metallic. Time had folded thin here. Minutes stretched and contracted, like the slow rise and fall of your own chest. Your eyes drifted to the patches of damp straw you'd swept earlier. Where moments before they brought you a rhythm, now they reminded you of fragility. How many more suns would you endure before everything shifted for good? Shapes in the corner stirred, silent watchers, their faces drawn tight with grim determination. The fire caught their eyes, making them shimmer with thoughts unspoken, fears unshared. The air grew thick with anticipation, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting. You inched toward the door, your steps small on the uneven floor. Outside, a whisper brushed through the mist, so faint it could have been a trick of the mind. Yet you knew, with chilling certainty, it was a warning borne on the wind. A soft scrape came from the shadows. Nails on stone, or was it a slow, deliberate drag? You froze. A flicker of something dark moved just beyond the window. Not quite a shadow, but close. The last ember of warmth momentarily flared in your chest, and then wavered, as if sensing the approaching cold. Your breath caught, not in fear, but in a sharp readiness that prickled every nerve. We don't have long, the man said, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the chamber walls. His voice was steady now, the weight of inevitable action settling over him like a shroud. You nodded, heart drumming a slow, primal tattoo. Whatever fate awaited beyond this gray dawn, the silence had already spoken, and it whispered, relentlessly, that what was coming would change everything. Outside, the mist thickened like a veil pulled tight over the village's secrets. And in that silence, you heard the faintest sound, footsteps, careful and deliberate, weaving into the stillness, drawing closer to the chamber's door. The figure stepped forward, the dim firelight flickering against crooked shadows that clung to his worn cloak like old scars. His boots, caked in mud and gravel, left silent imprints on the cold stone floor, the only evidence of movement in the heavy stillness. Ye could almost hear the breath of the village itself, suspended in a frozen whisper, waiting for the next sound to break the fragile calm. His eyes, hollowed yet sharp, scanned the room briefly, as if measuring the weight your small sanctuary carried nowadays. Fragile, worn, yet stubbornly enduring. A faint tremor traced his jawline, a trace of something close to despair, but held firmly. At bay. They've gathered closer, he said, voice low and gravelly. Closer than we feared. The words fell like stones, dropping into a dark well, rippling through the small circle huddled around the fire. The embers snapped, flaring briefly as if trying to ward off the gathering shadows, pressing at the chamber's edges. Outside, the mist had thickened into a gray shroud, wrapping the village like a funeral veil. You swallowed dryly, fingers tightening around the coarse wool of your cloak. Your throat felt rough, a silent scream caught in the cold air. How ironic that the greatest enemy wasn't out there in the open, but lurking just beyond the fragile walls of routine and hope. It was the return of dread, patient, creeping. A murmur rose at the fringe of the group, low as the rustle of dead leaves. Someone's voice cracked, distant yet urgent. The man shook his head and raised a hand, calling silence, but the tremor lingered, a fragile thread holding together a tapestry unraveling fast. Outside, a wind stirred, sighing through narrow alleys and shuttered windows. The brittle branches of skeletal trees scraped the sky like scratching fingernails. The world had gone quiet, save for that slow, creeping heartbeat of distant footsteps and whispered plans. You moved closer to the fire, feeling the brittle heat crawl up your fingers. For a moment, the room seemed less cold, the orange glow painting faces with fleeting warmth, highlighting lines of worry and fleeting sparks of stubborn resolve. In this interrupted calm, time itself seemed to stretch like a thin veil pulled taut, ready to tear. "We can't wait much longer," the man muttered. "If they breach the outer walls, the village is lost. Every door could become a tomb." You pictured those doors, heavy wooden barricades, soaked with rain and fear, hinges groaning under the strain of the unknown. The thought set a knot in your stomach, twisting with the cold dread that had settled deep in your bones. The chamber's shadows flickered as the fire guttered, then steadied. Somewhere close, a rat scurried, its quick footsteps a reminder of life still clinging to this place. You let your gaze drift toward the narrow window. Beyond it, the mist shifted, a gray ocean roiling slowly, swallowing fences and rooftops. Ghostly shapes wavered just out of sight, blurred by wet morning haze. The world outside felt distant, like memories fading before full wakefulness. Suddenly, the faint scrape returned, nails against stone, slow and deliberate. Heads turned sharply, breath hitching in unison. You pressed your back against the cold wall, muscles taut, senses sharpened to the smallest sound. The silence grew heavy again, oppressive. Then, almost imperceptibly, a door creaked far down the corridor, soft and slow, as if the building itself hesitated before the inevitable. The man's eyes narrowed, fists clenching. His presence became a steady anchor amidst the growing storm. "Who's there?" a harsh whisper demanded, barely louder than the creak, yet full of the edge born from months of exhaustion. The reply was silence, A cold fear slithered up your spine, a realization that the enemy might not announce themselves. They would slip through shadows, unseen yet omnipresent. Village's heartbeat quickened in your chest, a frantic rhythm echoing the soft, ominous footfalls. You swallowed, breath catching on the edge. The fire's glow seemed to falter, as if the flickering light feared to draw attention in darker times. A single twig snapped beneath a heavy boot outside the chamber door. A deep exhale escaped you, part relief, part tension, but no comfort followed. You glanced back to the group, faces pale, eyes wide, clenched jaws surrendering to silent prayers. The room hummed with unspoken dread, a shared breath held tight in anticipation. Then faint above the thudding pulse of fear, a distant bell's toll sliced through the mist, a raw and ragged sound cutting through days of silence. It struck chords, struck somewhere deep, stirring memories of warnings and ancient truths. Signal, the man said softly. They're already here. The words landed with crushing inevitability. You could almost see the walls leaning inward, the air thickening with the scent of wet earth and cold iron. You felt the fragile ember within you flare briefly, a stubborn glow in the encroaching dark. It was a reminder that even in such shadows, in the cold memorias of stone and straw, humanity refused to vanish quietly. No one moved. The silence returned with added weight, each breath a tether binding you to this moment, the cusp before change. Your eyes fixed once more on the window. There, just beyond the glass, a shadow twitched, a subtle movement that didn't belong to the wind or mist. And in that trembling silhouette, you knew the waiting had ended. Something was coming. Something that would shatter the fragile peace and draw you into the unfolding storm. The chamber seemed to hold its breath with you. Then, a sharp intake of air broke the quiet. Not from fear, but from a restless readiness. Your heart beat, slow but steady, as the door whispered open just a crack. The door cracked open wider, a sliver of darkness folding into the room like a thickened breath. Your chest tightened, not from alarm, but from the careful readiness that twilight hours often breed, when the world seems suspended between waiting and upheaval. The figure paused just beyond the threshold, shoulders squared in a silent resolve that seemed to anchor the trembling edges of your fragile hope. The fire's glow tangled with the shadows cast by his worn cloak, and for a brief moment, you saw more than just exhaustion etched on his face. There was a gathering storm, the quiet before chaos spilled like wildfire. The scent of damp earth clung to him, mixed with the faint tang of something metallic, iron, or perhaps the sharp sting of old wounds just reopening beneath ragged breaths. His gaze swept slowly across the dim chamber, settling briefly on yours. No words needed. The understanding passed between you was stark. the kind carved from shared survival rather than spoken promises. Behind him, a long breath reverberated through the still air. The village outside seemed to hold its own as well, as if the mist had thickened into a gravecloth, weighing down secrets and fears alike. Every surface around you, from the rough stone walls to the brittle straw beneath your fingers, pulsed with a slow, unyielding tension. The quiet wasn't just a pause, it was the calm before the storm's first violent crack. "That's why I came back." His voice broke the silence, low and commands quiet attention. "They're moving faster, closer than the last watch." "Closer," you echoed silently, tasting the word like a bitter herb that refused to be swallowed whole. Your hands flexed, gripping the coarse wool of your cloak as if it could shield you from the gathering darkness outside these walls. A distant thud echoed down the corridor. Heavy footsteps, no longer tentative, but steady, purposeful, pressing closer like the slow tick of time, drawing you toward a grim covenant. A flicker from the fire caught the dull gleam in his eyes. You noticed. Then the calluses lining his palms, the shifts in his stance that spoke of long battles fought, not just with weapons, but with the weight of endless waiting. Around the fire, the others shifted, their faces illuminated by the fragile orange glow that seemed to push back the stone's cold for fleeting moments. Murmurs arose like fading embers, half-spoken fears that the darkness outside had already breached more than just physical boundaries. You pressed your palms flat against the rough stones at your back, grounding yourself as memories surfaced unbidden. Doors slammed shut against the hollow night, whispered warnings passed like a secret contagion, faces twisted by dread behind shuttered windows. Outside, the air shifted suddenly, a stifled rush that carried the scent of damp leaves mixed with smoke, the essence of a storm brewing on more than just the wind. His eyes narrowed. They're not just coming for the village. They're after something we can't afford to lose. The words hung heavy, suspended like a veil, between you and the unknown. You swallowed past the lump, forming deep in your throat, the chill in the room pressing tighter, as if the stone itself was exhaling its cold breath. Your gaze drifted to the narrow window, where the gray mist clung fiercely to every roof and fence post. Shapes swirled there, blurred and indistinct, like ghosts caught in a slow dance with dawn's failing light. Then a sudden clatter escaped the shadows near the door, a scraping that was too deliberate, too measured to be the whim of anything natural. Silence followed, dense and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic beat of your heart, loud as a war drum in the heavy air. Your breath stuttered just as the door swung open fully, and the firelight revealed a second figure stepping inside, cloaked, hood drawn low, features obscured, but unmistakably poised with purpose. The first man's jaw tightened. Recognition sparked briefly in the flickering light, But there was no relief. Instead, a sharp tension coiled in the air, as if the room was a trap now sprung too soon. "You're late," the newcomer muttered, voice rough but steady. "No time for pleasantries," the first replied, stepping aside reluctantly, allowing the second to approach the circle gathered around the fire. Eyes met, whispers ceased. The fragile warmth between the group dimmed under the weight of unspoken truths. Something deeper than fear had anchored itself here, unease wrapped in necessity, the heavy burden of secrets shared in desperate hope. The newcomer reached into his cloak and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in coarse cloth. The flickering fire caught the edges of leather straps and the glint of something metallic beneath. The fire crackled, sending sudden sparks swirling like fireflies, moments of vivid light against the oppressive gray. "What is it?" Your voice barely rose above a whisper, the question both simple and laden with the gravity of all that had passed before. "It's the last piece," the second man said, eyes darkening. "The key to why they won't rest." A cold shiver moved through the room, threading its way between bodies huddled close despite the chill. Outside, the mist began to recede, slowly, pulled back by the waking breath of dawn. But the weight of what was coming settled heavier in your chest. You could not say yet if this promise was salvation or the herald of deeper shadows. The fire guttered once, a final flicker before settling into ash and dark silence. And then a noise, a whisper carried on the chilly wind, just beyond the broken stones of the village gates. Not footsteps, not a voice, but a soft, eerie hum, half song, half warning. You turned sharply toward the window, heart lurched. For in the shifting gray, a figure moved with impossible grace. Something, no, someone, whose arrival would unravel everything you thought you knew. The chamber held its breath once more, and in that holding silence, you felt the fissure open. Something was breaking through. Something not meant to be seen, yet here it came, slow, inevitable, like the dying embers before the final blaze. The newcomer's bundle shifted in his hands, the coarse cloth rustling softly, like a whisper caught between worlds. The firelight trembled, casting flames that danced as if reluctant to witness what was contained within. You caught a faint glimmer, something metallic, edged with worn leather. Held tightly, as if the last hope rested on that fragile grasp. The room felt constricted, every breath heavier than the last. The crowd around the fire swayed subtly, shadows merging with faces drawn tight by fear and a threadbare hope. Outside, the mist had pulled away slightly, but the village wore its silence like a shroud, unwilling to reveal what lingered just beyond the horizon. Of buildings and bare branches, the first man stared at the second, his eyes sharp, corners crinkling from days spent watching, waiting, losing. "Is it enough?" he asked, voice low, roughened not only by smoke and sweat, but also by the weight of unanswered questions. The second shrugged, the gesture small, exhausted. It's all that remains. The rest was lost or taken. We have no choice but to trust. You swallowed the lump rising in your throat, the cold pressing in. Trust felt like a fragile thing in this place, thinner than the wisps of smoke curling from the dying fire pit, more tenuous than the threadbare cloak cooling on your skin. Outside, the wind rose, a soft sigh curling through the narrow alleys, carrying with it a scent of damp earth and distant smoke. The mist began to retreat, not in gentle waves, but in sharp pulls, as if something had begun to drag it back. The village seemed to hold its breath again, the fragile calm, warning of what was to come. The first man stepped forward, voice steady, despite the turmoil beneath. "We need to move. There's little time." A sudden crack interrupted him, a sudden crack that shattered the stillness, like ice breaking on a winter pond. The door slammed open with a harsh bang that echoed through the stone chamber, the air rushing in with it, biting and cold. The fire caught the movement, leaping wildly before settling into anxious flickers. A silhouette framed in the doorway, a woman, her features sharp, shadows pooling beneath her eyes. Her breath came fast, mixing with the cool air in ragged gasps that carried the feverish urgency of someone who had raced across wet roads and narrow paths. "Ravens are circling," she said without preamble, voice slicing through the tense quiet. "The Lord's men, they're closer than before, spread through the woodlands like wolves." The group shifted, murmurs rising, then extinguished as the first man signaled silence. You felt the fire's warmth ebb away, replaced by a creeping chill that burrowed deeper than the stone walls ever could. "And you? How did you come through?" the second man asked, eyes narrowing. She wiped mud from her brow, eyes narrowing. "Foxes can slip through even the tightest traps," she said, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed the price paid. "Not all of us will. Make another night." Your heart hammered in your chest, the rhythm, that of a trapped animal counting down its dwindling seconds. You pressed your back into the cold wall, fingers clutching the wool of your cloak tighter as the flickering firelight revealed the lines of exhaustion and mounting dread on every face gathered. Outside, the faintest rustle of movement caught your attention, like whispers brushing along the edges of the mist. The village lay vulnerable beyond the thin fortress of this chamber, and these few brave souls. Every shadow coaxed the breath from your lungs. Every distant sound ratcheted tension higher. The woman stepped further inside, lowering her hood, but not her guard. "We don't have long before they find the token," she said, glancing at the bundle in the newcomer's hands. "If it falls into their grasp, everything crumbles. No mercy will follow." Your throat tightened. The word token spun nervously in your mind. It felt simultaneously tangible and elusive, like a secret tether holding the fragile balance of this world. The second man nodded slowly. Then we prepare to move by first light. Few can be trusted, and fewer will survive. Another pause, the weight of unspoken history settling like dust. Eyes drifted to the flickering fire, to the damp straw underfoot. The room, dense still moments ago, now seemed charged, ready to snap or surge. Your breath caught again, a sharp intake that was neither fear nor relief, but the promise of action. Outside, the veil of mist was thinning, but in its retreat, a shadow moved deliberately, larger than a man, fluid as smoke, yet defined by an intent that chilled you deeper than cold stone. A silhouette stretched against the gray sky, refusing to fade. The first man's voice broke the silence at last, low but resolute. We stand on the edge of night and day, of silence and the storm waiting to break. Ready yourself. You straightened, legs stiff from hours of waiting. The chill welling from the walls bit at your skin, and yet the ember within you sparked anew. Fragile but defiant, a sudden sharp sound pierced the stillness. A single slow footstep, heavier than all the rest. It was close, too close. The chamber door creaked once more, this time wide open, and with it the darkness poured in. The fire's fragile glow cast long fingers across the stone floor. Tangled shadows deepening the corners of the chamber, like secrets pressed tight. The woman's breath still came heavy, the sharp edge of urgency never quite leaving her tone. Around the quiet circle, faces drawn taut with exhaustion shifted, each silently weighing the gravity of the token now held between weathered hands. Your gaze kept returning to that small bundle, the final piece, mysterious and yet impossibly tangible. It felt heavier than it was, like the sum of every hope and fear folded into the worn cloth, a tangible heartbeat in a place held captive by silence. Outside, the wind had picked up, sighing through narrow alleys and rattling loose shutters. The gray mist was no longer just a veil, but a living shroud, creeping closer, as if the dawn itself hesitated, reluctant to reveal what lurked beneath. The first man, steady despite the wear of endless nights, broke the silence. Plans must be made. The token is a beacon, and every shadow knows its light. Murmurs fluttered like dry leaves, fragments of thoughts barely formed, but alive with unspoken dread. You could feel the chamber's pulse quicken, a fragile rhythm that bound the strangers here into reluctant kinship. A faint scratching scraped at the heavy wooden door, a slow, deliberate sound that opened a cold space within your chest. Breath stalled. Eyes flicked toward the source, but the darkness beyond seemed to drink the sound whole. Suddenly, the door creaked wider. A shadow unfurled into the room, wavering at the edge of the firelight. A figure stepped in, his gait true and measured, the leather on his shoulders creaked softly, soaked with rain and earth. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept once around the room before settling on the bundle. "You carry what they seek," he said, voice low and steady. "But not all who follow intend to use it kindly." Unease settled over the group like a stone plummeting through still water. The man who held the token tightened his grip, knuckles white in the fire's glow. Outside the window, the mist thinned just enough to sketch blurred shapes against the sky. Figures moving with a purpose that felt too precise to be accidental. The village, once a quiet cage, now thrummed with the promise of violent change. The newcomer's gaze met yours. There was a weight there, a warning layered beneath tired resolve. "We can't wait," he urged. "They'll break through before the sun rises. Every step outside this room is a gamble." You swallowed thickly, the desertion of warmth suddenly sharp against the cold breath of the stone chamber. Your hands instinctively sought the rough wool of your cloak again, a shield too thin but no less comforting. A sudden gust pushed a loose shingle against the window frame. You caught the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, interlaced with something acrid. Smoke? No, an edge like iron too distant to place, but near enough to unsettle. The fire flickered, shadows playing tricks on tired eyes. The woman who had entered last moved closer to the token, eyes narrowing. "We don't have the luxury of trust anymore. Not here, not now." Her words fell like gravel across the fragile hope that had taken root. Around the fire, others nodded, silent affirmations in the face of unknown betrayal. The heavy wooden door groaned again, pulled by forces unseen. The air thickened, shifting with an unspoken threat that writhed through you like cold fingers. Footsteps echoed, no longer hesitant, but swift and sure. Not many, but enough to fracture the brittle calm. You pressed against the wall, the cold stone biting into your back, grounding you against the rising tide of dread. The fire's glow dimmed. The room shrank beneath the weight of what was closing in. The man with the token glanced sharply at the newcomer. "They're closer than we thought." "No mistakes," the newcomer warned. "One slip, one sound, and this all ends here." Too long. A slow dance of light and shadow playing across the landscape. In a fleeting moment, a figure emerged, still, watching, impossible to read in the half-lit gray. Your heart thundered in your chest, each beat a candle flickering in a relentless wind. Then, without warning, the sharp clash of metal broke the silence, faint, distant, like a knife scraping against stone. The room froze. The woman's hand darted toward the bundle, fingers trembling but sure. "They're testing us, prying open weaknesses." Your breath caught as the chamber door slammed shut with a hollow boom that rattled deep in your bones. A silence fell again, thick and expectant, as if the very air held a secret pressed close to breaking. You dared a glance at the window. The mist had retreated enough to reveal a single shadow detaching from the rest, gliding toward the village's heart. A soft hum filled the space, just beneath hearing, a sound both eerie and hypnotic, threading through the cold like a whispered curse. Your eyes met the first man's, and in that brief exchange, the shared understanding settled. Nothing would remain the same once the dawn finally broke. The fire guttered, sending a final flicker of light before surrendering to ash. And in that brief darkness, you felt the weight of the night shift as the chamber door creaked open again. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but with the force of inevitability. A figure stepped inside, face obscured by shadow, but you sensed immediately. Whatever had come through the mist was here, and the storm waiting for you beyond the... Dawn was no longer just a threat whispered on the wind. It had arrived. The shadow that had slipped through the door now pressed into the circle around the fire, and for a fleeting moment, the flame's fragile glow caught the sharp lines of a face half hidden beneath a hood. The air thickened, tightening like a noose around your throat, as if the room itself held its breath, waiting. Eyes met, searching, wary, a silent litany of distrust passing between those who had long learned the cost of misplaced faith. The bundle shifted once more in the newcomer's hands. Its rough cloth whispered secrets best left unspoken, a shroud for a fragment of hope precariously held between dread and necessity. Outside, the mist, once a steady curtain, peeled back unevenly, revealing jagged silhouettes of gnarled trees and shuttered homes. The village, a fragile heart beating beneath the veil, seemed to pulse with a muted desperation. Somewhere beyond the crumbled walls, unseen watchers moved, their presence a sustained pressure against the very air. The first man stepped forward, his voice low and gravelly, yet steady enough to cut through the suffocating silence. If they want the token, they'll come for it, no matter the cost. We can't wait for them to pick the locks or slip through cracks in our resolve. You swallowed, feeling the weight of those words settle heavy in the pit of your stomach. The flickering firelight painted restless shadows on the stone walls, shifting like restless spirits, caught in a dance too eager to end. The woman, whose eyes held both grit and exhaustion, approached the bundle cautiously. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed the cloth, a subtle dance between reverence and urgency. We must move, soon, before the dawn dares to ignite the skies, and their hunt begins in earnest. Her words were met with a chorus of silent nods. The room, once burdened with the weight of waiting, now hummed with the low current of movement and decision, an electric charge threading through every breath. You stepped even closer, the coarse wool of your cloak, a biting reminder of the cold pressing in from every corner. Your eyes lifted to the narrow window, where the fading mist whispered of secrets best kept hidden. A sharp wind stirred the brittle branches outside, carrying the faint scent of damp earth mingled with something acrid, smoke, or perhaps the unmistakable tang of blood not yet spilled. The second man, still gripping the token, finally spoke, voice rough but resolute. No one who leaves this chamber does so unaware. The path ahead is lined with shadows deeper than any night. We carry not just the weight of this token, but the fate of everything that clings to it. A distant clang, metal striking metal, echoed through the corridor beyond, brief but unmistakable. Heads jerked in unison as the sound cracked the fragile calm like ice breaking underfoot. The fire flared, then dimmed, as if recoiling from the threat, gnawing at the edges of your fragile sanctuary. A stiff breath slid over the room, weaving into the chorus of unvoiced fears that had gathered here like unwelcome guests. You pressed your back to the cold stone once more, fingers splayed flat, grounding yourself as the murmurs gave way to silence. For a breathing space, the chamber seemed to exist outside time, poised at the edge of a blade, catching the first ghost of a storm no one could outrun. Then the woman's gaze snapped toward the door, sharp as a blade drawn too late. The soft scrape, the whisper of a footfall, returned. Too deliberate, too close, moving like a shadow that refused to be ignored. The second figure shifted beside you, eyes narrowing carefully, the tension brimming like a held breath ready to shatter. "They're inside the gates," he murmured, "closer than we dared believe." Your heartbeat thrummed a primal rhythm beneath your ribs. The fire's amber fingers stretched wider, a final, defiant glow before retreating into ash. Outside, the world began to pale with the first hesitant touch of dawn's light, but the glow was weak, too feeble to chase away the pressing gloom, or the sense that something vast and terrible had already crossed the threshold. Another crack, the unmistakable sound of wood splintering, shattered the fragile quiet. The heavy chamber door jolted on its hinges, the lock giving way with a final, agonized sigh. The room tensed as the darkness beyond the threshold rippled. A breath held tight and then exhaled in a rush. Slow steps entered next, deliberate, echoing soft threats on ancient stone. The newcomer's cloak shifted once again, a silent herald. Your eyes struggled to discern shapes beyond the firelight, but shadows swallowed details whole. A sudden flicker caught your vision, a glint too swift, too precise to be mere reflection. Metal, sharp and hungry. No one spoke. You exchanged glances, each understanding the unspoken. The door was breached. The fragile sanctuary had fallen to inevitability. Then, from the depths of that blackened entrance, a faint hum rose, low and haunting, threading into the fabric of the dawn like a dark lullaby. It curled around the chamber walls, a sound not meant for ears, but felt deep inside, where dread takes root. And you realized, with a chill that slid beneath your skin, that this was no mere intrusion. It was the beginning of everything breaking apart. The fire sputtered once more, its dying light clawing at the dark, and through the narrowing crack of the open door, something slipped silently in. Something watching, waiting. Something that would unravel the threadbare piece you'd clung to for so long. The next breath you draw will carry you past the edge of waiting, into the thunder of what's to come. The shadows that clung low to the chamber's corners seemed to tilt and shift as the figure stepped wholly inside, the firelight bowing to his presence like a reluctant witness. You held your breath, the rough stone pressing cold behind your back, your eyes darting over the bowed heads and tightly wound faces huddled near the last flickering embers. The bundle, small and weighted with more than cloth and leather, felt suddenly heavier in the man's grasp, as if every ounce of hope and dread lingered inside that trembling wrap. Outside, the mist had pulled back like a veil, reluctantly raised, revealing fragments of twisted branches and worn rooftops, pale and wan beneath the first hesitant traces of dawn. "They're closer," the first man's voice broke, gravelly and low, a threadbare tether holding the room together. His gaze lingered on the new arrival, like a wary sentinel, sizing up a dangerous storm. The newcomer's eyes met his, dark and unreadable, like still water hiding sharp stones. A sharp silence froze the space, the kind that carries more weight than any spoken word. Your skin prickled, sensing the delicate balance of trust stretching thin, ready to snap. The woman who had raced in moments ago dropped her hood entirely, revealing a face carved by exhaustion and fierce resolve. Her eyes flicked to the bundle and then back to yours, as if searching for a glimmer of something unspoken, a sign that despite the gathering threat, a flicker of courage still pulsed in this dim chamber. The fire fought for breath, casting ghostly light that danced on the cracked stone. You reached out almost instinctively, feeling the fragile beat of life wrapped in coarse fabric, positioned between these desperate souls. The air thickened with tension, mingling with the sharp scent of damp earth now tinged faintly with smoke. Something acrid and lingering that threaded itself into your lungs. "They come for more than the village," the newcomer said quietly, eyes burning with tired fire. "They want the token, because it is the key to everything we've tried to hide." You caught the edge in his voice, a warning, but also a plea, a promise and a threat intertwined. Outside, the mist danced with the cold dawn breeze. It whispered of secrets pressed too deep into the soil, of eyes watching beyond broken fences, waiting for the moment to strike. The village, so long trapped beneath quiet despair, now thrummed with a restless urgency. The fire sputtered. A loose ember flared before fading, the fragile warmth slipping down the edge of night. Another sound stirred, a slow scratch at the heavy wooden door. Everyone's breath hitched as the echo lingered, measured, deliberate, a slow beat like a pulse demanding notice. You pressed back against the wall, the stone biting deeper than before, grounding you against the rising tide, threatening to spill over. "We can't wait," the woman said, voice sharp enough to cut through the haze. "Each second we linger is—" A knife held at the village's throat. The man with the bundle shifted his weight, knuckles whitening in the fire's glow. "The walls won't hold them for long. Whoever moves outside these stones has something to lose, or everything to gain." The door groaned, pulled by a force unseen, the old hinges protesting with a drawn-out creak. Hearts thudded, breaths caught between hope and despair. Shadows stretched longer, folding into the corners as the light retreated. Outside again, the mist peeled away, revealing a figure poised beyond the edges of the village. A silhouette lingering just at the fringe of vision, indistinct but unmistakably there. A voice from the depths of your memory echoed faintly, a quiet warning from days blurred by fear. This night would not end softly. The fire's glow dimmed further, flickering like a tired pulse struggling against the dark. The room shrank beneath the weight of what waited beyond the door. Not merely intruders, but a breaking of old seals, a shatter of fragile peace. Suddenly, the heavy chamber door gave a violent rattle, a splintering crack that sent a shudder running up your spine. The lock, worn and weather-beaten, surrendered with an agonized sigh. The threshold darkened as shadows spilled in, thick as the cold breath of winter itself. Your heart drummed in your chest, each beat sparking a flicker of defiance, even as the room plunged toward the inevitable. Every eye fixed on the entrance, pupils wide, with silent prayers and trembling resolve. The sounds of footfalls rose, stealthy yet sure, a rhythm that spoke of hunter and hunted, entwined in a slow, deadly dance. Cloaks whispered against stone, boots pressed without mercy or hesitation. You reached instinctively for the rough wool cloak draped across your shoulders, fingers curling around the familiar fabric as a lifeline. A movement flicked past the firelight, a blade kissed by dawn's pale touch, glinting sharper than the faint hope in the room. The tension broke like thin ice, giving way to dark waters. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than any shout. Then a breathless whisper hovered, soft and eerie, wrapping itself around the edges of the chamber, like a lullaby sung in the key of danger. Your gaze snapped to the window. There, in the thinning gray mist, a figure glided forward, elegant and terrible in its stillness. Not quite human, yet impossibly alive. With purpose, its presence sliced the dawn air, a living shadow moving with unsettling grace. The embers flickered once, twice, and then died. The first man's voice cracked, low and raw. This is no longer about shelter or survival. What has crossed that threshold is something we feared in whispered stories. Something that will unravel the world we thought we knew. The flameless chamber seemed to hold its breath with you, and in that breath you felt it. The slow, inevitable breaking of everything. The door creaked wider, and the darkness stepped fully inside. The shadow stepped fully into the chamber, its presence folding around the last flicker of firelight, like a heavy curtain drawn over fragile glass. The air, thick and wet, with damp stone and unspoken fear, now held a shift, a settling. As though the slow turning of fate's wheel had reached its true axis. You watch the figure, cloaked and steady, as tension disperses in the weight of finality. His eyes meet yours, dark pools, edged with exhaustion, and a trace of something resolute, almost tender. The others, those who had endured days shaped by silence and shadow, breathe as one, sharing in the fragile moment before resolve steals their bones. The token, still wrapped in its coarse cloth, lies heavy between hands, worn not only by labor, but by the burden of hope and dread entwined. It is both a beacon and a curse, cradle of secrets that no one could afford to lose. Outside, the mist retreats finally, surrendering to dawn's pale light. The village, once smothered under a curtain of fear, now stirs gently beneath the soft awakening. The sky, muted and gray, offers no promises, only the quiet testament of cycles turning, as they always do, indifferent to human struggle. The woman who entered, with breath ragged, speaks softly now, a calm anchoring her fierce spirit. They came as we feared, drawn by hunger for what we protect. But the token remains safe, for now. The first man nods, his lips pressed in a firm line that holds back both relief and sorrow. We bought time, he says, voice low, reverberating with the history etched into days spent watching shadows deepen. Not forever, but enough to plant new roots. A subtle creak echoes from the door, and slowly, the community that once huddled in silence begins to shift. Faces once drawn tight, with anxiety soften, reflecting something fragile, survival's quiet grace. You trace the worn wool of your cloak, feeling the rough threads beneath your fingers like old truths, frayed yet steadfast. The silence that had gripped you tight unspools, replaced by a rhythm more human, more alive. Outside, the smell of wet earth mixes with the first breath of clean air. The village's heart beats again, slow but certain. Footsteps, no longer those of unseen threats, but of lives cautiously returning to their routines. Voices melding with the distant clucking of chickens, the gentle creak of carts on mud. In the chamber, eyes meet in quiet understanding. There will be days yet marked by hunger, by fear, by the ever-present shadow of loss. But in this room, here and now, there is a shared pulse, the stubborn flicker of hope. The woman lowers her gaze, her weariness blending with newfound strength. "We endure," she says, "not because we believe the night will never come again, but because we choose to face it." The token is carefully folded and placed on the stone beside the fire pit, its weight less terrifying now. A symbol not just of what was fought for, but what remains worth protecting. A soft smile touches the lips of the first man, a rare blossom after long winters spent under bleak skies. He meets your gaze, and in that silent exchange, an unspoken promise that stories will survive, whispered in quiet chambers like this one, carried by those who remember the cost and the courage. The fire, small and flickering, warms the room anew. Its amber fingers stroke the stone, knitting shadows into light. Outside, dawn spreads steadily, brushing away mist and doubt alike. You breathe in slowly, the chill easing from your bones as the day opens around you. The muggy musk that once clung heavy to the walls dissolves into fresher air, a cleansing as much of place as soul. Moments stretch gently, each one a thread woven into the fabric of something enduring. The storm has passed, leaving behind a cautious calm, the delicate hush after the thunder. You sit back against the cold stone, the hard contours grounding you in both past and future. The fire crackles softly, a lullaby for restless minds and weary hearts. No grand declarations mark this peace. It is quieter, a simple truth that survival often wears the face of small acts, sweeping straw, sharing warmth, holding fast when all else fades. Outside, the village breathes through its cracks and crevices, awakening in muted colors and soft murmurs. And you, illuminated by the slow warmth of ember and dawn, feel the weight of night lift, a silence not of dread, but of gentle promise. The world turns, as it always does, and in that turning, you find rest. The fire dips low, shadows folding into the edges of the chamber like a whispered goodnight. You close your eyes, the rough wool a familiar embrace, your breath slow and even. The silence now is soft, a quiet curtain drawn not against hope, but in its honor. Sleep comes, carrying you beyond stone and shadow, into the calm after the storm.